My mom looked me in the eye and said, "You're not in the will. Your sister Emily gets the house." Then she told me to pack my things and leave. So I did. 4 days later, she called in the middle of the night, her voice shaking, screaming that the account was empty. And in that moment, everything I had held back, the years of silence, the betrayal, the quiet loyalty my father Robert had given me, came crashing into one truth. They thought they owned everything, but they never understood what he left me. I'm Evan Blake Morrison, and this is my story. But before I share it with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. It means more than you know to someone like me who grew up feeling invisible. Your support helps me share my voice, and maybe, just maybe, it makes sure stories like mine are never forgotten. I drove into Burlington late on a Saturday, the sky the color of wet steel and the porch light burning like it always did when Dad Robert knew I was coming. The house looked exactly the same, 2-story white siding, hedges trimmed to a fault. But when I stepped inside, it felt like I'd walked onto a stage where everyone already knew their lines, except me. The kitchen counters were crowded with pastry trays and polished fruit bowls, and Mom Linda was moving fast in a black blouse that whispered when she turned. "Big brunch tomorrow, Evan," she said, kissing the air near my cheek like I was a neighbor dropping off mail. "People from the club don't touch the lemon bars." Dad. Robert slid a mug across to me and waited until my hand wrapped around it before he asked how Seattle was, how the code review went, whether my boss still said circle back like it solved anything. He asked as if the answers mattered. I leaned into the steam and let his calm settle into me, while upstairs, laughter ran across the ceiling like silverware. Sunday was all gleam. Mom Linda floated in the living room, introducing Emily in a floral dress to her friends, with the easy pride of a showroom tour. She has an artist's eye. Mom Linda said, "She's basically me at her age." I came in from the kitchen with a fruit tray, and Mom Linda cut a glance so sharp it could have sliced the melon. "Not now, honey." The women smiled politely at the air. My hands stung where the cold tray bit my palms, and I remembered being 8, standing in the same doorway with a spelling bee ribbon while Mom Linda posed Emily on the staircase for pictures. I slipped out through the hall and down the steps to the garage. The air smelled like oil and cedar. Dad Robert's old lathe slept under a canvas sheet flecked with dust like frost. He followed me slowly on the stairs and took a folded paper from his back pocket. My 7th grade algebra test, the one Mom Linda once yanked off the fridge because no one hangs test papers past middle school. Dad Robert thumbtacked it to the cabinet over his bench, a stubborn little ceremony. "You don't have to be anyone else, son," he said. Matter of fact, never did. We stood there a minute, listening to the house breathing above us, the moving of chairs, the clink of glass. Emily calling Mom Linda in that voice meant for rooms full of mirrors. When I went back upstairs, I kept to the edges, carrying plates, refilling water, not wanting to be the problem in a morning Mom Linda had curated like a storefront. Near the end, I passed the dining room just as Mom Linda lowered her voice to a purr for the woman with the pearls. "In a few years," she said, "this place will still be Emily's. It just suits her." The woman glanced at me and then away, embarrassed for reasons she couldn't name. I pretended the platter in my hands required all my attention and kept moving. Emily cornered me by the hallway mirror, breath sweet with Prosecco. "You okay?" she asked brightly, smoothing lipstick that didn't need smoothing. "You look like you're about to audit the furniture." I smiled because pushing back would only make me look jealous. When she fished in her bag for gum, a flash of silver caught the light. One of Dad Robert's cards, his name raised on the plastic, and beneath it a tiny authorized user, Emily Morrison. She shoved it back without noticing it noticed and drifted toward the laughter like a moth. I took my coffee and walked out to the yard. The grass had gone shaggy at the edges, and the bird feeder Dad Robert had built from a scrap of fence hung empty, creaking on its wire. Upstairs, someone told a story about a pool in Palm Springs. It was all sunlight and clinking in the sense that I was only useful so long as I took up no space. Dad. Robert came out quiet and stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder the way he did when he wanted to steady me without making a point of it. "You're here," he said. It sounded like a fact, not a question. And I breathed in the damp air and pretended that could be enough. We were washing serving platters after everyone left when Mom Linda's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and put it face down. "Nothing important," she said, then added, as if to the room, as if to the future. "Some people just don't understand the weight of a house." That night I tried to sleep in my old room and lay awake tracing the familiar cracks in the ceiling, thinking about the test paper in the garage and the way Mom Linda's hand had hovered over Emily's shoulder while she introduced her as a version of herself worth clapping for. Near midnight, Dad Robert tapped my door and asked if I wanted tea. We stood at the sink like conspirators and drank it without talking. The next afternoon, as I was loading the last tray into the dishwasher, my phone buzzed. A neighbor had found Dad Robert on the back steps. Before I got to him, Mom Linda called to say it was just a little tumble and that the ER was overreacting. When I finally heard Dad's voice, it was thin and rough, as if he'd been talking all day to someone who wouldn't listen. The orthopedic surgeon said, "Slow recovery," like it was a phrase on a form. He stepped out with me into the hallway where the air smelled like bleach and exhaustion. "We'll get him up with a walker soon," he said, "but at his age expect setbacks." When I returned to the room, Mom Linda was checking her watch. "We have that brunch next week," she murmured. Not to Dad Robert, not to me, but to the schedule itself. Emily pressed 2 fingers under her nose. "The antiseptic smell makes me nauseous," she said, apologizing to the air. I took the discharge papers and a stack of pamphlets about fall risks, home rails, medication timing, and my name appeared on every line that required someone to be reachable. Back at the house, the kitchen turned into a staging area. I pushed the mixer aside to lay out pill organizers, stacked gauze in a plastic bin, taped the doctor's schedule to the side of the fridge. The armchair by the front window became Dad Robert's second skin, a landing pad with a plaid blanket and a bell he never rang. Mom Linda cooked less, claiming the flour bothered her hands. Emily said she was too sensitive to handle medication. She might panic and mess up the doses. I cut my Seattle hours and told my manager I'd be remote for a while. He said he understood. The weeks became Rails Morning Vitals meds at 9 PT exercises before lunch. A nap that stretched longer each day. Carol Jenkins, a retired nurse with kind eyes and shoes that didn't make a sound, came 3 afternoons a week. She taught me how to pivot Dad Robert without wrenching his hip, how to read the subtle grimaces that meant we'd moved too fast. In the afternoons, if the light was right, I wheeled him to the sliding door so he could watch the yard. The bird feeder swung in the breeze, empty more often than not. "We used to have finches," he said once, not complaining, just inventorying the past. Some days when I walked to the curb for mail, the box was bare even on delivery days. I didn't think much of it until the 3rd week I opened it to nothing and felt a pinch between my ribs. We went digital. Mom Linda called from the couch when I asked. "E-statements. It's neater." She waved a hand toward the clean counter as if tidiness were an argument. I didn't push. Carol stayed late that night. As we set the last dose in the little blue cup, she told me about a man she'd cared for whose daughter had access to everything and considered it her stipend. "I'm not saying that's happening here," she said, voice low. "I'm saying I've seen it. Good people get tired. Tired people make bad choices." Rain started in the late afternoon and kept up like a drum. I bandaged Dad Robert's incision while he stared out at the yard, the gray day reflected in the slide of the glass. "You don't owe anyone anything," he said, sudden and clear. I laughed it off. "Except maybe you," He frowned as if I'd missed the point, then let it go, and I felt the words hook somewhere under my ribs, a quiet anchor I didn't know I'd need. The months stretched. The walker became a wheelchair more often than not. I moved my laptop to my old desk, then moved it down to the dining table so I could answer emails within earshot of the bell he still wouldn't ring. Mom Linda started leaving takeout menus on the counter like decoration. Emily had a reaction to the smell of rubbing alcohol that somehow didn't stop her from meeting friends for rooftop drinks. When she came home late, she threw her shoes near the couch and said things like, "I wish Dad Robert could see Sedona." And I watched Emily scroll travel accounts while I crushed pills between spoons. The bird feeder rusted at the seam. One morning, Carol arrived early and found me on the phone with the doctor about a refill. After I hung up, she took in the kitchen, the pill chart, the thermometer, the notes in my crooked block letters, and nodded to herself. "You'd make a good nurse," she said. I told her I hadn't planned on it. She gave me a look that meant very few people plan on the lives they end up living. On a Tuesday, the hospital mailed a summary of benefits, and when I slit the envelope, I realized it was only for physical therapy. Nothing from the bank had come in months. That night, after I settled Dad Robert and stepped into the hall, I heard Emily talking to Mom Linda in the den about a resort with horseback trails and wine tastings. "Charge the deposit," Emily said lightly. "Dad Robert would want us to decompress." The word caught in my throat. I waited until the house went still, then took my laptop to my old room and tried to log into the medical support account I'd helped set up for Dad Robert after his retirement, the one the pharmacy used to bill co-pays, the one we created so nothing would fall through the cracks. The username went through. The password had always been the same 2 words Dad Robert used for everything that mattered. I typed them and felt my heart trying to outrun itself. A red banner slid across the screen. Access denied. The carpet in the bank's office muffled every sound, but my heart still hammered loud enough I was sure Thomas Grant could hear it. He was the branch manager, the kind of man who spoke with precision as if his words had been weighed before leaving his mouth. He slid a file across the polished desk, tapping a page with one finger. "Your access has been revoked, Mr. Morrison. Power of attorney was updated 2 months ago. Only your mother and sister are listed now." I kept my voice level, though my throat felt like it had closed. My father did. He authorized this. Thomas didn't answer directly. He only adjusted his glasses and said, "It's a valid notarized document. If you have concerns, you'll need to take it up with them." I walked out into the sunlight, which felt too bright, the air too thin. At home, the living room glowed with lamplight and the hum of the television. Mom Linda poured herself a glass of wine, ruby liquid, catching the light. Emily lounged on the couch, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. I laid the bank printout on the coffee table. Why didn't anyone tell me I asked? Mom Linda lifted the glass lips, brushing the rim. "Because it's handled. You've got your hands full with dressings and pills. Let us take care of the rest." Emily smirked. "You're better with the medical stuff anyway. I'd faint just looking at the charts." I stared at them both, the sense of being erased pressing hard against my chest. Later that night, I tried to ask Dad Robert. He was in his chair by the window, the glow of the street lamp spilling across his lap. "Did you sign those papers?" I asked quietly. His fingers tapped the armrest. Then he shook his head faintly. "Don't turn this house into a courtroom, son." His voice cracked with exhaustion, and I knew what he meant. He wanted peace, not conflict. But peace had a price, and I could feel the weight of it settling over me like dust. Carol lingered at the door after her shift that week. She glanced at the papers I'd left half hidden under a magazine. "I've seen this before," she said softly. Sometimes the cost of silence is the house itself. I wanted to argue to say Dad Robert would never let that happen, but I couldn't ignore the fact that the signatures were there, neat and legal, locking me out. The following evening, Mom Linda set a business card on the counter, the embossed letters catching my eye. Grant and Heller Attorneys at Law. We've spoken with professionals, she said, her tone laced with finality. Everything is in order. Nothing for you to worry about. She spoke as though legality was compassion, as though paperwork could take the place of duty. Emily waltzed in from the gym, swinging a branded tote. She showed off a glossy membership card. Dad Robert wanted me to relieve some stress, she said, holding it like a prize. Automatic billing makes it easy. She laughed a sound that bounced hard off the walls. The knowledge that it came out of Dad Robert's account money meant for his care made bile rise in my throat. I went to the study late that night searching for any trace of my father's real intentions. The drawers smelled faintly of old ink and cedar. Buried beneath tax returns and worn manuals, I found a craft envelope with my initials scrawled across the front in his hand. My fingers trembled as I slid a nail under the flap, but before I could pull out what was inside, the door creaked. Dad Robert stood in the frame, eyes tired but steady. He looked at me for a long moment longer than comfort allowed, and finally said, "Not yet, son. Not yet." The envelope burned in my hand as I slid it back, his gaze following every motion. That night, lying awake, I realized the truth. They had the law on their side, neat papers and notarized signatures. But I had something else. I just didn't know yet what it was, only that it was written in my father Robert's silence, waiting for me to be ready. Summer rain slicked the hospital parking lot, and when the doctor called me into his office, he didn't bother to close the door all the way. His words were blunt, without room for hope. Pancreatic cancer, late stage, weeks, not months. The chair I sank into was hard plastic, but it felt like falling through air. My mouth was dry, my questions stuck in my throat. He handed me a stack of referrals I couldn't read. Back in the waiting room, Dad Robert caught my eyes. He didn't ask, didn't need to. He reached out his hand, squeezed once, and nodded. The calm acceptance in that gesture cut sharper than any diagnosis. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to my manager in Seattle. No explanations, no end date, just a resignation. My career could wait. My father couldn't. Hours later, Emily called from a nail salon, her voice bright over the buzz of dryers. "You're really throwing yourself into this, huh? Guess it suits you better than coding all day. You've got the temperament for it." I held the phone away for a moment, staring at the muted television screen in the hospital lounge, the captions running faster than my thoughts. Dinner at home was a strange theater. Dad Robert at the head of the table, thinner already, hands trembling slightly as he lifted his fork. Mom Linda flipped open a glossy brochure with palm trees and turquoise water. "A Bahamas cruise would do wonders for us," she said, tapping the page. "After everything we deserve, a little escape." She didn't glance at Dad Robert once. He pushed peas across his plate, and when his eyes met mine, I saw the heaviness there. The sadness of a man already half forgotten by the people he lived for. The following week, the oncologist handed me a treatment schedule: chemo, radiation, endless appointments. When we were alone, Dad Robert pressed the papers back into my hands. "Don't let them drag me through machines," he said quietly. "I want quiet, not wires, not more waiting rooms." His eyes didn't waver, and I felt the weight of his choice settle between us. At home, bills kept arriving, not for treatment, but for indulgence. An invoice for spa therapy and Emily's name billed to Dad Robert's account. Receipts for dinners in Seattle that I knew she hadn't paid for. Each paper felt like another slice across skin already raw. Carol pulled me aside one afternoon. "Your sister asked me to sign off on the meds last week while she ran an errand," she said. "She never came back. I covered, but this isn't the first time." That night in my old room, now littered with pill charts and appointment reminders, I sat down to write an email to myself just to document everything. I listed the spa charges, the Bahamas cruise brochures, the missing medication logs. The words blurred together a catalog of absence of care not given of money burned on vanity while I counted pills one by one. Rain drummed on the roof as I opened the drawer of Dad Robert's desk looking for fresh envelopes. Instead, my hand touched craft paper rough under my fingers. My name was written across the front in his familiar handwriting. This time I didn't wait. I broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and read his words. Evan, if you're reading this, it means I no longer have the strength to say it out loud. You have done more than enough. Don't let this house or their noise steal the rest of your life. Live yours. Start before it's too late. The words blurred as my eyes filled the ink trembling in my hands. In that moment, I knew he'd seen it all, the burden, the silence, the choices I'd made that no one thanked me for. He'd seen and had planned something more than I could yet understand. Outside, the bird feeder swayed empty in the storm. Inside, I sat with his letter, realizing that the true inheritance had already been written not in bank accounts or deeds, but in the quiet trust had left with me alone. The envelope sat heavy in my hand, its craft paper worn at the edges, my initials written in ink that had bled slightly over time. I unfolded the pages slowly, the lamplight spilling across words my father Robert had written with the effort of a man already running out of strength. His script trembled, but the message was clear. I've placed a deposit on an apartment in Madison. It's close to the park near the school. You'll have a new start when you need it. My throat closed as I kept reading. Clipped to the letter was a rental contract signed in his name, but naming me as the primary tenant once the transition came. There was a receipt for the deposit, neat as always, filed with the precision Dad Robert never lost. Another slip confirmed a payment to reserve a hall in Madison, a small wood-paneled venue that I remembered passing once on a drive with him. He had pointed at it almost casually, saying, "Nice place. Feels honest." I hadn't known then what he meant. Now I did. He wasn't just planning for me to survive without him. He was quietly preparing for my future to be rooted somewhere that wasn't poisoned by favoritism. I sat on the edge of my old bed with the papers spread out before me. There was more, a draft of a will never notarized, his original handwriting stating the estate should be split evenly between his children. Heavy lines of ink crossed it out, jagged strokes where fairness had been erased. Folded into the stack was a handwritten note with numbers and a password access to an auxiliary account that Mom Linda and Emily had no idea existed. The letter ended simply, "Evan has done enough. Don't lose yourself here. Take what peace you can. Start living." Downstairs, voices carried from the kitchen. I crept halfway down the stairs, holding my breath as the sound sharpened. Mom Linda's voice was low but sharp-edged. "When he goes, the house is Emily's. That's already settled." I heard the clink of a glass. "And that account," she added. "It's more than enough for us to live comfortably for years." Emily laughed, the high-pitched kind she used when she was sure she'd won. Finally. "We've waited long enough." I pressed the envelope against my chest, pulse racing. I knew what they didn't, that what they counted on was already slipping beyond their reach. That Dad Robert had made sure not everything could be stolen from under his nose. But revealing it now would only ignite a war he didn't have the strength to fight. For now, silence was my only weapon. At dusk, I stood in the yard staring at the empty bird feeder swaying in the breeze. The sky bled orange and purple, and I remembered that long drive to Madison, Dad Robert pointing out the complex by the park, a place where laughter from children echoed through the street. He had already chosen where my life would restart. The ring of the landline inside snapped me out of the memory. I heard Mom Linda's clipped voice. "We should call the attorney soon. Don't give Evan any chance to interfere." Her words carried into the hall. I folded the envelope carefully, slid it into my backpack, and climbed the stairs. I knew now everything was already set in motion. Evenings blurred into routine, the low light of the living room, Dad Robert, in his chair breath shallow, while I kept the ledger of pills and appointments. But on one of those nights, a thought pressed against me, the password Dad Robert had once trusted me with for his emails. My fingers hovered before I typed it, half expecting rejection, but the account opened like a door into another life. What I found made my chest tighten. Line after line of statements scrolled across the screen: charges from a spa retreat in Sedona, deposits to a cruise line bound for the Bahamas, monthly fees for an upscale gym. None of them for medical care, all billed to Morrison, Maine. The account I once believed was for his security was bleeding into luxury for people who barely showed up to hand him water. I printed everything page after page until the desk drawer was warm from the machine. I slid the stack into a black binder, its spine bulging with evidence, each sheet screaming what I had suspected, but hadn't been able to prove. The next day I met Thomas Grant again, this time in a quiet cafe downtown. He stirred his coffee slowly, then leaned closer. "I shouldn't tell you this," he said, "but your father, he opened a secondary account. He listed you as the sole beneficiary. I don't think your mother or sister even know it exists." The relief and weight hit me at once. Dad Robert had shielded me, given me a lifeline. But it also meant when the storm broke, I would be the one holding the truth that could split the family apart forever. That night I sat with Dad Robert by the window. He was smaller now, his skin pale under the lamplight. He pointed weakly toward the yard where the bird feeder swayed empty. His eyes lingered there. I took his hand. "Don't worry, Dad," I whispered. "He'll take care of it." His fingers pressed mine, a faint nod, sealing the promise. Later I combed through more receipts in the binder: charges for jewelry, a diamond ring billed at nearly $6,000, purchased under Emily's name, but paid from Dad Robert's health account. My blood went cold. Upstairs, her laugh filtered through the walls, careless and satisfied. Carol came by for her shift. The following week, her brow furrowed as she packed away her gloves. "Your mother asked me to step down," she told me quietly. "She said they'd be hiring someone else, someone closer to the family." Her look told me she understood what that meant. They wanted to erase anyone who might tell the truth. I stood in the hallway one evening, binder in hand, when I heard their voices in the kitchen. "Once he's gone," Mom Linda said, pouring wine, "the house is Emily's. That's already decided." The scrape of a chair, then Emily's voice: "Evan will sign. He always does." "Well, push it through." I held the binder tighter, the edges cutting into my palms. Upstairs, Dad Robert coughed faintly, the sound almost lost under their laughter. I knew then, while they plotted over property and vacations, I was watching a man fade away in the same chair where he had once read me bedtime stories. And I also knew something they didn't, that the account they thought of as theirs was already hollowing out, that the evidence of their indulgence was stacked neatly in my desk drawer, waiting. The house felt colder that night. I checked Dad Robert's meds, tucked the blanket around him, and stared at the window where the bird feeder swayed. For him, I would hold the silence a little longer, but the silence was cracking, and when it broke, nothing would be the same. The morning my father died was gray and damp, the kind of Burlington morning where fog hangs low and the world feels suspended. I was changing the sheets on his bed when I noticed his breathing had thinned into shallow gasps, his chest rising and falling like a tide pulling away. I leaned close and heard him whisper, his lips barely forming the words, "Don't wait. Start living, Evan." His hand trembled in mine, and I held on as long as I could. By the time the house stirred with the sound of Mom Linda's heels and Emily's phone buzzing in another room, he was gone. The funeral came quickly, more theater than farewell. I arrived early, setting up chairs in the small church, arranging flowers, making sure everything was in place, because no one else had thought to. When the guests trickled in, I greeted them quietly. Mom Linda arrived late, draped in a tailored black suit, her face painted with practiced grief. Emily swept in behind her oversized sunglasses, hiding eyes that hadn't shed tears. I watched them glide to the front pew as if attending a gala. And when the time came for the eulogy, Mom Linda took the pulpit. She spoke of Dad Robert's quiet strength, his sacrifices, his loyalty to his family. The words rang hollow, heavy with irony, because she had never borne the weight of any of it. I kept my eyes on the floor, clenching my hands until my nails left marks in my palms. After the service, I returned to the house, the smell of his soap and black coffee still clinging faintly to the rooms. But instead of mourning, I found them already sitting in the living room with glasses of wine, the table cleared for business. Mom Linda slid a document toward me, her tone brisk. "This is a waiver. It confirms you won't contest the estate." Emily leaned in, smirking. "It's just a formality. The house is mine. Dad Robert wanted it that way." I stared at the paper. "Dad Robert just died," I said, my voice low. "And we're not trying to be cold, Mom," Linda interrupted, sipping her wine. "But these things move quickly. It's best to stay ahead of them." She didn't even flinch as she handed me a pen. I looked at the photo of my father framed on the mantel, his eyes kind even in stillness, then bent over and signed. No one said thank you. No one acknowledged the gravity of what I had just given up. Mom Linda stood brushing invisible lint from her skirt. "You'll need to be out in 12 days. We've already spoken to a realtor." On the coffee table lay a contract with Emily's name already typed neatly as sole owner of the house. I caught a glimpse before she tucked it into a folder, her smile sharp as a blade. Emily raised her glass. "Once the account clears, we'll be set. Bahamas in the fall. Finally, things are looking up." That night, I packed in silence, folding clothes into a single duffel bag, tucking Dad Robert's letter in the black binder of evidence deep inside. I slipped out unnoticed, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses trailing behind me. The house no longer felt like home. As I loaded the last box into my car, I heard Emily's voice through the open kitchen window, dripping with triumph. "We're about to be rich." 4 days later, in the quiet of my temporary apartment in Madison, the phone rang. The screen glowed with a name I no longer recognized as mine home. I let it buzz twice, 3 times before I picked up. Mom Linda's voice sliced through the line sharp and panicked. "Where is it? The account's empty." I leaned back in my chair, the lamplight casting long shadows on the desk where Dad Robert's letter lay framed. "You had power of attorney?" I said evenly. "I wasn't allowed near it." Emily's voice cut in shrill. "Don't play dumb. You stole it, didn't you? You sabotaged us." I closed my eyes, speaking slowly. "Dad Robert moved it. He didn't leave what you thought. He knew who was there at the end. He made sure I would have what I needed." The silence on the other end was jagged. Emily broke first. "So that's it? That's everything? He left us nothing. He left you what you earned." I said, my tone harder now. "You took the main account for your cruises and your spas. What's gone was never yours to keep." Mom Linda's voice came back thinner this time, almost pleading. "We've already paid for the cruise. The house needs repairs. We made plans. You told me I wasn't part of this family I cut in. You said the house was hers. The money was yours. That was before. This is now." There was a pause. Then Emily's voice cracked, rage breaking into desperation. "We counted on that money. I quit my job. I didn't let her finish. Dad Robert saw everything. He didn't need to argue, didn't need to shout. He just chose differently. He left peace for me. That's something you'll never understand." Mom Linda's breathing on the line turned ragged. "Evan, please, we can work something out." "Just tell me." I pressed the phone tighter, letting the silence hang before I spoke. "No. You made sure I was erased. Now I'm gone." Then I ended the call. The apartment fell quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my heart. I sat for a long moment staring at the framed letter on the wall. The ink had faded slightly at the edges, but the words still burned. You have done enough. Live for yourself. I touched the glass and whispered the promise back to him. I didn't know what my new life would look like, but I knew it had already begun. Behind me, the city outside glowed faintly through the blinds, a reminder that while their world crumbled in the ruins of a house they thought was theirs, mine was just starting to take shape. I look back now, not at the battles over money or deeds or legal papers, but at the silence that followed the silence of a house with its porch light gone dark. The silence of voices that once drowned me out, collapsing under the weight of their own choices. My father Robert's last whisper wasn't about wealth or inheritance. It was about living, about stepping outside the shadow of a family that never truly saw me. For years I believed my worth was measured by what they gave or withheld. I carried the ache of being erased, the sting of being told I did not belong. But the truth revealed itself in the smallest ways in a letter written by an unsteady hand in a rented apartment already paid for in the eyes of the one person who never doubted me. My father Robert did not leave me riches. He left me the chance to live without fear of their judgment. When I hear that the house was sold for less than it was worth, when I see online posts pretending at luxury that hide nothing but defeat, I no longer feel anger. I feel distance. I feel free. Their downfall isn't my victory. It's simply the end of a story they chose to write for themselves. Mine is different. Mine is quiet mornings in Madison sunlight spilling across the floor. Laughter that isn't rehearsed. Peace that isn't borrowed. Mine is a life where I no longer have to apologize for existing. To those of you listening, maybe you've been the invisible one in your own family. Maybe you've been told you weren't enough or that you didn't deserve the same place at the table. Maybe you know what it feels like to love deeply and be met with indifference or to sacrifice everything while others turned away. If you do, then you understand why my father Robert's whisper mattered. He saw me, and maybe in hearing my story, you feel seen too. I'm not sharing this to dwell on pain, but to remind anyone who feels erased, you are not invisible. Even if those closest to you never recognize your worth, even if they choose comfort or control over love, your value doesn't vanish. Sometimes the only inheritance we get is the strength to begin again. And sometimes that's worth more than any deed or account. Before I go, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're from. I can't tell you how much it means to know that someone out there is listening, that my words reached beyond the walls of that dark house in Burlington. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It may sound small, but your support is a reminder that stories like mine matter, that voices like mine don't disappear. Thank you for walking with me through this. Thank you for giving weight to a story that for so long felt like it didn't belong anywhere. My father Robert told me to start living, and I finally have. And if you've been waiting for permission to begin again, let this be it. Live not for them, not for their approval. Live for yourself.